Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar, Act Now to Beat the Interest-Only Time Bomb. My special guest today is leading buyer's agent and best-selling author Miriam Sandkuhler from Property Mavens, who has some views on this particular subject. Any of you who tap into media regularly will be aware of this issue. It's received quite a bit of media coverage over the last, say, 2 months in particular. Particularly because of the large number of interest-only loans that are going to start coming due for expiry or for transition out of the interest-only period this year and for the next 3 years. There's been some quite alarmist views expressed in terms of what the impact of this will be. And on the other side of the argument, we've had Christopher Kent, the Assistant Governor of the Reserve Bank, expressing a far more moderate view in terms of the impact of this transition period with the number of loans coming off their interest-only period. So he tends to think that the transition is actually already underway and that the transition so far has been quite smooth and will continue to be, but other people have a different view in terms of the impact that will have on people who have these loans, and as they adjust to the new situation, what impact that will have on the property market. So I'm going to hand over to Miriam Sandkuhler to talk through her presentation and her particular views on the subject. I'm going to be silent in the background, A, because it's not a subject on which I feel expert, and B, because I'm not that well and likely to have a coughing fit at any moment. So Miriam, hopefully you're feeling a lot better than I am, and over to you.
Thank you, Terry. I am feeling better, so hopefully between the two of us we'll get through it today. So welcome everyone. We're going to talk about Act Now to Beat the Interest-Only Time Bomb. I do need to disclose that throughout the presentation we're not providing any tailored financial, tax, legal or property advice, and we strongly recommend that you seek independent accounting, legal, particularly finance and property advice from an expert before embarking on actioning any information disclosed in this presentation. By attending the presentation, you agree to release, indemnify and hold harmless all presenters, their agents, representatives and employees for any loss or damage you may suffer in any way associated with your attendance at this presentation and or as a result of not seeking independent financial or tax advice. So now that we've got all the compliance work out of the way, let's talk about what we're going to do today. So we're going to talk about what's the problem with interest-only loans. Do we need to worry? What are the potential consequences? We'll look at a case study or two, and we'll talk about steps where you can minimise risk for your own personal circumstances. So for those who don't know me, I'm the CEO and founder of Property Mavens. Now, we're a specialist property advisory firm. We work with home buyers, investors and home sellers, and we find what I call high-performing investment-grade properties, and we help people find the right property for their budget. I'm personally a licensed estate agent choosing to work as buyer's advocate. I'm also an accredited property investment advisor, which is a little bit like a financial planner, but for direct property only. And Terry mentioned my best-selling book, Property Prosperity, and I do a lot of media commentary as well. And interestingly enough, this topic I spoke about a couple of months ago on the 7:30 report. So let's talk about the problem with interest-only loans. Now, during the recent Senate committee hearings, it came to light that approximately $60 billion of interest-only loans will reset at higher rates and terms over the next 4 years. Now, in particular, 2019 and 2020 will have the highest number of loans that will convert from interest-only to P&I. And for some people, monthly repayments could increase by more than 50% as borrowers convert to these P&I payments. Now, liar loans could be as high as 1 in 5, and what a liar loan was over the years where there's been a little bit of what we call predatory lending, people were able to lodge what they call low doc loans. They required low amounts of documentation to support or substantiate income, and in a number of instances, many of the banks, as we now see in the media as a result of these hearings, have in fact allowed multiple loans to go through where figures have been falsified primarily by the banker or by potential mortgage brokers. So there's really no clarification as to exactly how many of those loans could come to the fore, but those people in particular could be at high risk, because if they shouldn't have qualified for a loan back then, they may still not qualify for a loan now. Also, there is some evidence to support that 8 in 10 small business owners have got their loans secured against their home. So this is really important if you've got your own business out there, to really have a look at some of the steps you can take to minimise risk, because you really are vulnerable if your business in any way doesn't perform and you have the potential to lose your home as a result of that. So you might want to look into that too. So the problem with interest-only loans, well, as you can see here on this chart, investor loans that are interest-only, there aren't too many of them coming to the fore in terms of billions of dollars that will be converting. However, if you look at this massive number of owner-occupier loans, you can see that the bulk of them, approximately 15 billion in 2019 and nearly 20 billion in 2020, will be converting or coming to their end of their interest-only period. And more than likely, they'll either have to convert to P&I or they may, if they're fortunate, be able to stick with interest only. It'll depend on, I suppose, APRA regulations at the time and bank policy. So let's talk about the problem with interest-only loans. Well, the nature of interest-only loan is that there's no compulsory requirement to reduce debt. Not everyone's good at actively reducing debt on interest-only loans in terms of managing their money, and normally this would be done by taking out an offset account and voluntarily putting money into that offset while meeting the minimum interest-only repayments. There's a strong reliance, particularly for investors, on capital growth to pay down debt by selling a property as an exit strategy. So they service the debt on interest only. They hope that over time their property is going to increase in value. And then when they sell that property at the end, they use the equity that they've earned to pay down the debt that they've taken. Now, a lot of property spruikers have promoted interest-only loans because it's enabled them to sell multiple properties to purchasers in the past. And again, due to predatory lending or falsifying of low-doc loan applications, many people have been able to build properties that have got multiple, or portfolios with multiple properties in there, on the basis of these applications being incorrect. And so again, for anyone who's got multiple properties in their portfolio that they may not otherwise be able to service the debt on once those interest-only periods come to an end, they really want to consider what steps they need to take. Now, as interest rates actually increase, and at the same time as principal and interest lending comes to the fore, property owners are vulnerable regarding not being able to meet their monthly repayments. So that's something they need to be aware of. And with new regulations, repayments are based now on the remaining loan terms being smaller. So once upon a time, it was a 30-year loan term with a 5-year interest-only period. And now that would mean that there's a 25-year loan term remaining, whereby you need to pay down debt on a P&I basis. So do you need to worry? Well, firstly, you need to decide which camp or category you fall into. Which one are you? Are you firstly someone who's on a high income? You have a lot of high surplus cash, or what we call disposable income. You're pretty good at managing your money and debts, and you can sustain a rate rise or two, and you can also sustain your loans converting to P&I. Now, if you're that person, you probably don't have a lot to worry about, but obviously it still doesn't hurt to assess your portfolio. If you're someone who's more of a moderate to low income earner, if you have low surplus cash or disposable income every week after you get paid or every month, if you're poor at managing money and minimising debt and you can't sustain a rate rise or a change to principal and interest, well then absolutely, you probably want to look carefully into the options available to you to see what you can do to best protect yourself. So this little article came out of the Herald Sun on the 25th of April. What it shows is the distinction between somebody's loan at a particular level converting from interest only to P&I. So let's look at owner-occupiers on the top of the chart here. If somebody had, we'll start with say $300,000 and they had an interest-only loan of 4.77%, and they then converted to a P&I loan at 4.29%, there would be a $300 difference per month that they would be paying additionally to what they're currently paying. Someone with a $500,000 loan, for example, again, if their interest-only repayments were $19.58 at 4.7%, and then they converted to P&I at 4.29, their repayment would increase to 2,471, which would be an additional $500 a month out of pocket. So you can see on this chart, the higher the loan amount goes, the more substantial the difference on a monthly basis. Then if we look at investors, well, we know that investors are paying a premium on their interest rate compared to homeowners. So if we look at someone here who's got a $300,000 loan, interest only at 5.02%, and they're paying $1,255 a month, well then that would increase to $1,560 with a differential of roughly $305. So not too different to an owner-occupier, just the fact that you're paying, slightly inflated interest rates. Same thing, someone with $500,000 worth of lending on an interest-only basis, their repayment would currently be $2,092 per month compared to $2,599, which is an increase of $500 a month. So you can see that per property, the bigger the loan, the bigger the differential once that converts. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't factor in then an ongoing interest rate increase on top of it. So this is more or less working on conservative figures, but you want to take into consideration what happens as those interest rates increase as well. So let's talk about the potential consequences, and let's talk about the market to start with, and in particular supply, demand and pricing. So an oversupply of certain property types hitting the market, such as apartments or house on land packages, could result in property prices levelling out or dropping due to a potential oversupply of stock, especially in high supply, low demand areas and suburbs. So particularly in these outer suburban estates where you've got vast tracts of land, some of these estates may be experiencing very high capital growth at the moment because you've got population growth and affordability driving those prices. You may not necessarily have amenity and transport and so forth keeping up with it, but if all of a sudden people are investing in those areas and they suddenly find that they've got to rapidly get rid of a property, you may find that those areas where there's high supply, low demand, as more and more stock comes on the market, could result in prices dropping. Capital growth rates across the board could slow down. Time on the market to sell a property could increase or take longer. So time on the market is literally from the day you list the property, how long does it take to sell it? And again, in areas where there's high supply and low demand, we see days on market being potentially quite lengthy, and there's a capacity for that to continue increasing. And then depending on the type of property you've got and where you've got it, there's potential for fire sales, which can have a substantial effect as well. So for example, if you're in a large apartment complex of say 50, 60, 80 apartments, and somebody's in dire financial straits and they have to get rid of their property really quickly, they may sell it at a fire sale price, and that affects the value of all the other properties in the building, particularly for the same floor plan, being almost reset to that lower rate. So this could also happen with house and land packages as well. And again, any property type or location where you've got high demand, rather high supply and low demand. So let's talk about pricing and time on the market. I mentioned forced or fire sales could mean selling for less, and then the debt held against the property will be your loss. So if someone's in a situation where they've got a property that they need to get rid of because they cannot sustain it, and you sell it for less than what it's worth, you incur that loss. You're still obligated to pay that loss off, and that becomes a tax loss that your accountant can advise you on what to do with and how you can use that moving forward as a carry forward loss. Sale prices could chase what we call a decreasing market. So as more and more stock comes onto the market, prices can start having a bit of a downhill slide. And then capital growth rates could slow down as a result of that. Time on the market could increase, as we mentioned. And you may need to sell a better property in your portfolio if no one wants to buy the poor performer. So, for example, if you've got multiple properties in your portfolio and you might assess them and decide that you want to sell the two worst, but the market isn't taking those, and you've got no choice but to reduce debt, you may actually have to look at your better performing properties because they'll probably be in higher demand and lower supply, and you may need to consider selling those as a means of reducing your debt rapidly. And of course, one of the other consequences is the bank or the lender can step in at any time and dictate which property to sell, particularly if you've got properties cross-collateralised. So that's where you might have a loan that's using two properties as security. So it could be your home for one component of the loan, and then it could be the actual investment property itself. That's where investors are really vulnerable, and mortgagee sales can also result in a loss of equity as well. So I'll give you an example here. This was a case study, Sally and Bill. Now, they bought an off-the-plan one-bedroom apartment in 2010 for $410,000. They didn't seek any independent or unbiased advice in terms of investing there. They bought directly from the selling agent, or the property spooker in this case. I actually did what I call a portfolio report for them 3 years later, and I analysed the property and its capacity to grow in value and the factors that needed to be taken into consideration. At that time, we'd already identified that the property had dropped in value by $20,000. Unfortunately, in this instance, my clients struggled to accept the fact that they'd made a loss, and they elected to probably put their head in the sand a little bit, to be honest. And unfortunately, what was forecast came to the fore. You know, there were hundreds of more apartments that came into the supply pool. They struggled to lease it, as those properties that were bigger and shinier and newer stole their tenants from them. So they actually had to drop their rent. They were already negatively geared on a low income, so they really didn't benefit from tax deductions. And unfortunately, the bank forced a sale on them 2 years later, so they would literally free themselves from debt. And unfortunately, at the time in the market, they only got $355,000 for it. So poor asset selection and the wrong investment strategy caused them a $70,000 cash loss. And they would have easily missed out on at least $80,000 worth of capital growth over that time frame, over that 5 years, because it's been during one of the biggest booms that we've had in Melbourne at the same time. So that proved to be a very expensive mistake for them, and unfortunately they used their home to secure the loan, and then had to take equity out of their home to pay down the debt. So these are the sorts of things that can happen when a portfolio is imbalanced in terms of its mixture of capital growth and cash flow assets. And again, depending on your personal circumstances and the level of debt you carry and your ability to meet those repayments, this can happen at any time. But what's scary in particular, as we just saw in the recent slides, is that 2019 and 2020 is when a lot of homeowners will in fact have their loans converting. Now, they may be in a situation like this, or it may be that just simply their need to sell because they can't meet their repayments increases supply across the market generally, which can of course impact everyone. So converting to a P&I loan, however, isn't all bad news. In this instance, this is an example of someone who's got two interest-only loans. The combined amount of those two loans is $1.1 million. They've currently got a standard variable rate at 4.41%. Their total combined interest repayments roughly work out to $4,043 per month, which equates to, down here, $48,510 per annum. Now, in this scenario, if they then took those interest-only loans and converted them to principal and interest, in this example, they're able to get a lower rate of roughly 3.84% because banks are incentivising people when they take interest-only loans by allowing them to pay a lower rate. In this instance, the individual's monthly interest repayment drops from $4,043 to $3,520. And effectively, by the time you add the principal component, their payment actually increases by $5,151. So they're paying less interest, but they're paying more of the equity off. And that's identified here on an annual basis where they're paying $61,807. So what that means currently, they're paying $48,000 interest only. The alternative is they take out a P&I loan and they only pay $42,000 interest, which means they've got a saving of $6,270 in interest component. Then by changing to the P&I loan, their overall repayment is $61,807. So it is an increase of $13,297, but their capital repayment is in fact $19,400. $567. So what they're doing each year, because there's a component of principal they're paying down, and using the saving, the interest saving as well, is they're reducing their loan by $19,000 per annum. So at the end of the day, though their repayments increase, they're actually better off because they're reducing their debt much more quickly. So that's something to not be afraid of, and it's something definitely worthwhile talking to your broker about, which leads us into the next step. So what can you do now to help assess your position and minimise any risk? So firstly, contact your mortgage broker or lender to review your position across all of your property loans, so your home property and your investment properties, particularly if you've got a mix in your portfolio, whether it's commercial or industrial or short stay or residential. Ask them to do some calculations assuming a 1 or 2% rate rise increase and a conversion to P&I at the same time, just so you can see what that cash flow effect's going to be on your disposable income on a weekly, fortnightly, monthly basis. That'll allow you to start doing some preparation and wrap your head around your budgeting and enable you to start analysing if you're in a position to meet those new repayments. Now, if you can't maintain or meet the new repayments, ask your broker what your lending options are to avoid selling your property in the first instance. So if you've got good properties in your portfolio, you want to do whatever you can to keep them. However, there might be some restructuring that your bank or your lender can do, and see what they can come back to you and what suggestions that they've got, particularly if they're an investment expert when it comes to lending. They might be able to assist you with some ideas there. So what you want to do when your loans do convert is you want to check the new principal and interest term of your loan to determine the loan length. You want to review all of your debts and your whole financial position to see if anything can be restructured for better cash flow. And consider restructuring your loan to a longer term. So, for example, normally a term defaults to a 25-year loan, but if you increase it to a 30-year period, that may help reduce some of your repayments over that time frame. So, for example, here, a $500,000 loan balance on a 25-year loan might typically be $26.40 per month as a default, but by taking it out for that further 5-year period, it might drop down to $23.90. Obviously, you may or may not consider that a lot of money, but everyone's circumstance is going to be different. And if you've got multiple loans at this level, well, that combined amount could actually add up to a fair bit. As a last resort, if you can't maintain or meet the repayments that are coming or the potential future repayments, consider selling your poorest performing property in your portfolio to reduce your debt and your repayment commitments. Now, the other thing that you can do is you might be in a position now where your interest-only loans may not come to fruition for another year or two. You might still want to consider converting them to P&I now, because the bank will only ever lend you money when you're in a really good financial position to be able to meet your repayments. So depending on what your circumstances are around employment, depending on whether or not you're going to keep a job, earn more money, maybe earn less money, however your circumstances might change, don't feel that you necessarily have to wait for that interest-only period to come to an end. Just work with your expert mortgage broker or lender to ask them what the options are, and just make sure you're in a position at the time when they do convert that you do qualify for a loan, because that may be a situation that presents itself if you don't, where you actually do have no choice but to have to sell the property, particularly if you've had a child in the meantime, one partner's not working, your income's reduced. All of those things get taken into consideration when banks and lenders lend you money. So you might want to make sure that if your circumstances are really good, solid and concrete now, to maybe reassess your portfolio and convert it now rather than wait as well. If you find that you can't, as I said, can't meet your repayments, identify the poorest performing property in your portfolio. So analyse your portfolio, consider your growth drivers, supply and demand, land availability across each property individually, and that should help you determine which one to sell or which one to keep. And absolutely importantly, before you actually put anything into play regarding selling a property, you need to seek tax and accounting advice so that you understand what the capital gains or capital loss situation may be, and whether or not you're going to have any tax bills that are owing or payable. So you need to get that advice as part and parcel of the advice that you seek in terms of your loan structuring, and then take that information to your accountant, sit down and talk about the implications of if you do anything regarding selling down parts of your portfolio. So Terry, you've been very quiet over there. That's probably it for me. Bit of a fast summation and only a shortish webinar this time, but hopefully enough information for people to start thinking about their personal circumstances. And look, my position, I'm always a little bit conservative and a bit risk averse. Better to be forearmed and forewarned to try and mitigate risk and take action if need be. And if you go through this whole exercise of assessing everything and you find out everything's okay, that's fantastic. You can sleep at night. You don't have to worry about what's going on in the media about it. But if there's any possibility that you could come unstuck on any of this, absolutely start doing those investigations and that research now. On that note, certainly how can we help? Well, we do what's known as a property portfolio review. So we take into account those considerations that I was talking about. So if anyone's got property in their portfolio and they're not sure, should they sell, what's performing, what's not performing, you don't know how to make that determination, then we can absolutely offer you a property portfolio review service, and we can do an analysis of each property on a case-by-case basis. So feel free to get in touch with us there on that one. And certainly if you need help buying and you need help on asset selection, you know, buying investment grade property, that's the top 8% of the market that outperforms the average. Well, certainly that makes a massive difference to someone's outcome in terms of their wealth creation over the longer term. And of course we can help people find those properties that outperform the market. We can help home buyers struggling to find the right house, villa or apartment for their budget. We obviously work with lots of busy professionals who don't want to waste time finding the right asset, and we certainly work with expats who want to return to Australia with a winning property portfolio, and we've got a number of clients who've worked with us who are fortunate to be in that situation. So if anyone would just like some general help, feel free to get in touch just on our website on the contact page. Pop in your details there, and we'll be in touch with you within 24 hours and hopefully we can assist you. And that's it for me, Terry, unless you've got questions you'd like to address.
Yeah, I could throw a few questions in your general direction, Miriam. Just preparing for this webinar, I did quite a bit of reading. What's out there in the media about this subject, and it was really quite, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, but there was just a diversity of views in terms of how serious a problem it is. Some people have been quite alarmist,
yeah,
and others been quite moderate in their view in terms of the consequences. As someone out there in the market speaking to people, what's the level of awareness or concern that you're perceiving about this particular issue?
I don't think there's enough awareness, and I think it's important that consumers be very concerned. And having spoken with a number of brokers, they are concerned for their clients, but they've got this very onerous process where they have to speak with each lender about each client's loans individually, one by one, by phone, and try and understand what their portfolio is made up of, and, you know, particularly loans that were set up a number of years earlier or loans that they weren't involved in setting up. It's very laborious for them to try and get a handle on the financial position that some of their clients might be in, because some of them are actually trying to get ahead of this situation, contact their clients, bring it to their attention and alert them to the fact that they might be susceptible or vulnerable. But the reality is there's no system that the lenders have put together to make it easy for brokers to find out, nor the individual, I guess. So I'm pretty surprised. I'm talking to mortgage brokers all the time, offering our portfolio review service to help their clients. And some of them have got clients who, you know, high income earners, they're not vulnerable, and others certainly know that they've probably got clients that are vulnerable. But if they've got hundreds of clients on their books, it's pretty hard and as I said, time consuming to work through each individual one and try and figure out who is susceptible and who's not to having a problem in a year or two.
Yeah, and while we're having this debate, which started being discussed, I guess, in the media in a widespread way, perhaps about 3 months ago.
Yeah.
But since then, we've had the daily explosions coming out of the Banking Royal Commission.
Yeah.
How do you think that all of that is going to affect this issue in terms of the attitude of the lenders to assisting people when they're coming into that transition phase?
Well, I can't talk to their attitude. I mean, you can see that a lot of the behaviour has been morally corrupt, all driven by profiteering and no doubt making targets, KPIs and bonuses. So there's been a lot of greed that's been driving this amongst the banking institutions. Who knows? Will they turn around and admit to clients that we should never have given you this loan and as a result we're going to give you some leeway now? I can't imagine they would. Because they're just recreating the same problem. So it's a massive issue. I mean, it's devastating, I think, for consumers to see how much rorting has gone on amongst these institutions and not just the banks, but, you know, the financial institutions such as AMP as well, and, you know, a number of others. So I think there's a blatant, potentially a substantial mistrust from consumers now when it comes to lenders. And I think consumers have to be very, very wary of their position and certainly not take the position that the bank's going to look after them if their circumstances turn upside down and they get in trouble.
One of the most important pieces of advice that I took out of your suggestions on how steps that people might be able to take who find themselves in this situation.
Yeah.
The one that stood out for me was to act early, do something now, not wait till you're at the brink of the transition being forced upon you, but to act early when you're actually in a relatively stronger position with your lender. I think that's one of the key pieces of advice you gave, I think.
Absolutely, and most people don't understand that if they plan on having a child, even though they might not be having a child right now, but if they plan on having it and obviously they make their lender aware of it, they just automatically assume, yep, you've had a baby, we're going to take that income out, we're not going to factor it into our calculations, and that will determine whether you get a loan or not. So it's nowadays, it's not even a case of, yes, we've actually got a child and what's our position. It's even the concept of maybe having one that can affect someone's capacity to qualify for a loan or not. And the thing is, lending is so unbelievably complex. It's like buying property. Property is unbelievably complex, but real estate agents have dumbed it down for decades and people think it's simple. And consequently, people lose a lot of money in property investing because they're listening to the wrong people giving them biased advice. And it's always sales advice. It's never property advice. The same thing applies in lending. You know, there are so many lenders and it's such an area where policy and lending and bank policy is changing hourly and daily in some instances. I know brokers where they get multiple updates a day based on lenders changing policies. And in many instances, they've started loan application processes with one lender who changes their process midway, which means they've then got to find another lender. And that individual may no longer qualify depending on their situation at that moment in time, based on the change of policy at that moment in time. So if people really want to feel like they're in control, if they want to start investigating their options now ahead of when these interest-only periods change, I think it's a smart idea. I mean, there's no obligation to have to convert now, but if you're looking at it now and finding out that you're not going to qualify then, well, you really want to start thinking and considering what your options are. And if it means you have to sell, well, better to get it into the market sooner rather than wait a year or two down the track when suddenly you might have potentially hundreds or thousands of people selling at the same time. And there's no way of knowing how many people that will be because the banks themselves don't have clear records on how many people that will be themselves.
Which type of property investor out there are the ones that are most at risk? Is it those that own multiple properties all with interest-only loans? Are those the sorts of people that are most at risk?
I think the people who've been dealing with property spruikers and developers and investor clubs where, you know, let's help you buy 10 properties in 10 years, and more often than not, for people particularly on more moderate incomes, the only way they can afford to do that has been interest-only loans. And, you know, I've known of people who've had, say, 3 or 4 properties in their portfolio, but they've got very low disposable incomes. They're literally cash poor. They're, supposedly asset rich, even though some of those assets aren't growing and some of them may in fact have negative equity. And they don't understand why it's not working because their property spruiker, club, mentor, whatever guise they've passed themselves off as, has told them they're going to make a squillion dollars, and they can't figure out why it's not working because they've been given that biased advice. So I think if anyone's been in a situation where they haven't worked with a licensed buyer's advocate or someone with an investment qualification, such as an accredited property investment advisor, if you've taken free advice from spruikers or you've attended seminars or you've gone and sat with developers who've educated you or organisations who've educated you around investing in property and how to buy multiple properties and how to do it with interest only, and each time you bought a property they've made a sales commission or they've earned a membership fee or they've earned money somehow, whether it's been disclosed or not or whether it's been masqueraded as something that it isn't, they're the people that really need to start looking carefully at their situation because they haven't received property advice, they've received sales advice. It probably hasn't been in their best interest and they're probably the most likely who are vulnerable. And in particular, if they've bought a poor performing asset like a house and land package in an area of high supply, low demand, or an apartment, or just any type of property of that nature.
Okay, so I guess in summary, what I've taken out of your presentation, Miriam, is firstly, don't panic, but do take action. Seek advice from qualified people, and it's very, very important that you seek advice from the right people because a lot of people have gotten to this situation, as you've pointed out, by taking advice from all sorts of wrong people, and in particular, act early without a sense of panic, but there certainly are advantages in reviewing your situation ahead of the point where you have to take action.
Absolutely. And again, better you look into it and it's all good and you don't need to do anything, or better you look into it, you find out you've got to do stuff, but you've got time to do it and you're not doing it in a distressed state amongst potentially hundreds or thousands of other people that are going to leave it to the last minute and not deal with it until it happens. And even then they might not know what the issues or implications are at that point in time.
Yeah, and as you pointed out with one of your case studies, people who do take action early, do get good advice, can actually transition to a P&I situation. The next slide, I think, is the one with that example where a case study of someone who has transitioned from interest only with a couple of loans to P&I, paying substantially less interest. Overall repayments are bigger, but they're actually reducing the loan balance and in the long term much better off. So there are some positive outcomes that can be achieved by people who act sensibly, get good advice and take action early.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say, Terry, too, I mean, certainly I know with what I do when I work with clients, I take a financial planning approach to direct property investing. So it's really important to understand somebody's age and what stage they're at in their life, and if they've gone past that accumulation phase or if they're at an age where they might not have a long lifespan in the employment market moving forward. And so, come 50, maybe that's a really good time to start paying down debt as quickly as possible because you just don't know how long you'll be employed in the market for. So, that's something to take into consideration as well. It might be different if you're 30 years of age, but if you're 50, 55, you've got a whole lot of interest-only debt, you're potentially vulnerable to, losing a job or work hours reducing, that's something to start looking at as well, and another reason to maybe convert to P&I and pay down debt as quickly as possible. And if you come up to a situation like this with these clients in particular, look, there's nothing worse than dealing with the reality of investing to make money, assuming that you would, based on whatever information you were given, that's always going to tell you that you're going to make money, and then finding out, in fact, you've lost money. That's a really bitter pill to swallow. I certainly know I've made that mistake myself, and that's part of what led me to coming into this profession and advocating for buyers and consumers to try and protect them from making those mistakes and providing that independent and unbiased advice. But I know for me at the time, emotional as it was and frustrating as it was what transpired, sometimes you've got to take the emotion out of it, be pragmatic, sell to protect yourself, because as you can see in this example here, if you've lost money, there's no guarantee it'll go up and you'll recover from it, and there's no guarantee that it won't continue going down. So when people turn around and go, oh, you know, I'll hang on to a poor performing asset in the hope that it's going to go up one day, well, if you don't have evidence to support that, and you don't have really strong evidence to support that, then you need to work on the assumption that it might keep going down, and then maybe now's a better time to sell it at a $20,000 loss than it is to wait and potentially sell it at a $50,000 or a $70,000 or a $100,000 loss. And again, it comes back to asset selection: apartments, house and land packages, any kind of property, particularly in markets where there's low employment, not a lot of infrastructure development going on. It just comes back to growth drivers and fundamentals around what constitutes a property's capacity to go up in value. And again, as I said, even if you know that you might lose money in the process, it's about dusting yourself off, reassessing your position and going, right, what do I need to do now, and how do I invest in investment grade property to A, make up that shortfall, get back to break even, and then end up moving forward into blue sky.
Okay, well, sound advice. Thank you, Miriam, and thank you for that calm, intelligent, rational assessment of the situation. As I said in my introduction, I've seen some quite alarmist analysis of this particular issue. The end of the property market as we know it in Australia, according to some, but really the situation is nothing like that. But it is a situation that has to be dealt with, and it's wise for people who are in the situation of facing a conversion from interest only to P&I sometime in the next 1 to 2 to 3 years to be thinking about the issue and thinking about the action they could be taking to get the best possible outcome. So Miriam, thank you for your presentation and your view and analysis of the issue. Anybody who would like to contact Miriam, the details are on the screen. If you haven't read her book, Property Prosperity, I urge you to do so, because it's one of the best books on property investment that I've read in my 3 decades of researching, writing about and reading about the property market. So definitely one to read. And yeah, thank you, Miriam, and thank you for people out there who have tuned in. And if you've got any follow-up questions about that issue or about property buying generally, please contact Miriam via the means on the screen.
Thanks, Terry. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. That's it for now. Terry Ryder from Hotspotting and Miriam Sandkuhler from Property Mavens signing off. Talk to you all again soon. Thank you.
Bye.